Welcome everybody for part 5 of the life of the Buddha. We have a number of interesting stories in this final chapter of the Buddha's life, the Buddha and the courtesan, attempts on the Buddha's life. So let's get started. First, the tale of the Buddha and the courtesan. Her name was Amrapali, and she was reported to be extremely beautiful. Now understand that being a courtesan was not a woman of ill repute, in that it was a respected profession in this place and time. So that's something that's important to understand. So she had heard the Buddha talk, and she gave everything she had to him. She had a mansion, she had mangrove groves, so I presume that she was doing well as a courtesan, and she gave all of this to the Buddha in order to help support him and the monks. Now here's where the accounts vary. According to some accounts, she was approached by some local Brahmin who were jealous of the Buddha and trying to discredit him. This type of thing went on a lot. You're a successful teacher. What happens? People are donating to you. Other people get jealous, and so there's some backstabbing going on, much as there is in the world today among politicians and even among spiritual leaders. Somebody says, oh, this person over there is a charlatan, and maybe that's true, or maybe they're just jealous. Anyway, nothing new under the sun. So the Brahmin were jealous, and they got her to agree to say that she slept with the Buddha. But before she could tell anyone, she was bitten by a cobra and died. Now, how we even have this story, I'm not sure. Okay, so that's one account. But some scholars say, well, that was actually a different courtesan, and Amrapali, Amrapali, after she became a nun, stayed a nun, and eventually became an arhat. And so she attained liberation before she died. I like that version of the story better. Let's go with that being some other courtesan who did not become a nun. But you get the idea that two things for me, emerge from this story. One, that the Buddha talked to everybody. He didn't just say, well, I'm not going to talk to her. You know, he was willing to spread his teachings to whoever wanted to listen to them. And the other thing that comes out for me is that he was willing to ordain people, which is nice. There are groups of Buddhists out there today who have very strict things about ordination, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but sometimes they go, in my opinion, too far. We're not going to ordain this person because they were previously a student of this other person. That person died before they released them, and therefore they can't ordain with us. That just confuses me. So the Buddha was not concerned about things like that. He's like, you want to ordain, your heart's in the right place, let's move forward. So I like that part. There was also another attempt to discredit the Buddha in the same year that the courtesan incident occurred. There were some ascetics in the area of Sravasti, and they got this wandering ascetic named Sundari to spy on the Buddha. Remember, the ascetics were people who practiced severe mortification of the body. How few grains of rice can I eat today? That type of thing. So that's what their practice was. So they waited until they were sure that a lot of people had seen Sundari coming and going into Jeta's Grove, where the Buddha was staying, and then they had her killed and buried in a ditch. And then they reported her missing. So they're trying to frame the Buddha and his monks that this woman got killed by them, right? However, the hired killers got drunk, bragged about the deed, and so the whole thing blew up. Now, I believe this story, and here's why. I used to be a law clerk in the Orange County Public Defender's Office, and one thing our clients all had in common was they liked to brag. They liked to tell the tale. Okay, well, not all of them, but the ones who got caught repeatedly, the ones who were our best repeat customers, they love to tell the story. So I completely see this as something that was likely to have happened. Yeah. So the Buddha maintained mindfulness in every activity. When he was not during the monsoon season, but traveling, he and his monks and nuns would walk 15 to 20 miles per day, between the begging rounds and the traveling to different towns and cities. And the Sangha followed this rhythm even when they got large enough to split into other monasteries, because the Buddha had so many followers that they couldn't all travel with him after a while. So some of them would stay in different places, but this was still their routine, was when there was not the monsoons to travel around and go on the begging rounds. The Buddha went against the caste system and taught everybody. In modern India, Buddhists lose their caste and are considered outside the caste system and are therefore allowed to have any job, which is pretty interesting. And I have verified this with people who've lived in India recently, that yes, this is indeed the case. Though there's a box on the job application for caste, you write in Buddhist, and you're eligible for that job no matter what it is. They won't rule you out because of your caste. So that's nice. The Buddha's, among his first teachings, we used to say these were his very first teachings with the Four Noble Truths. Now there's some scholarship that says maybe he taught some other things prior to that, but they were still very early in his teaching career. He taught on giving and morality, is what we think were his first teachings. How to be generous. And that would form the first of the great perfections that he would teach later on. There are 6 of those, and generosity is traditionally the first one that's talked about and taught. So then he taught about the Four Noble Truths, and he taught about not self, which is too big a concept to cover in the life of the Buddha. But it's basically the idea that we're all interconnected. And when we start thinking that I'm over here and you're over there, we've already made a mistake. Now the Buddha's cousin Devadatta, we mentioned him before. He decided to follow the Buddha around. And he attained some supernatural powers, and he was liked by many people. But while meditating, he got this idea. Thought, I could take over the Sangha. I should be in charge. And this seemed like a perfectly rational idea to him. So he teamed up with Ajatasattu. Now, this is the son of King Bimbisara. Remember, Bimbisara was friends with the Buddha's father back before the Buddha was the Buddha. And the Buddha had taught him a little bit after his enlightenment, and King Bimbisara was very impressed with him. Well, this is his son. Now, the son, Ajatasattu, had taken over Bimbisara's kingdom by force, imprisoning his father and leaving him to starve to death. Not a nice person. So the fact that Devadatta thinks, oh, this is be a good partner, tells us he's already on the wrong track, right? Not on a very skillful path. So Devadatta offered to take over the Sangha, and he has this powerful king at his side. And he says to the Buddha, this will let you rest. You've done so much over so many years. You just rest. I'll take care of the day-to-day stuff. And I have this powerful, wealthy patron, so you don't have to do anything anymore. And the Buddha declined. Devadatta, however, did not take no for an answer, and so he asked twice more. And you may recall this was the custom of the time to ask 3 times. But each time he did it louder. And so he's starting to draw some attention. And finally, the Buddha referred to Devadatta's offer as something that tastes bad in the mouth that one wants to spit out. Now, this humiliated Devadatta. He kind of brought it on himself, right? He's getting louder and louder and being a pest, and the Buddha's like trying to make the point clear. But Devadatta was humiliated, so now he decides he is going to have to deal with the Buddha himself. So later on at Vulture Peak, the Buddha was underneath the peak in some caves. Devadatta was up above, and he decides to roll a boulder onto his cousin. Not the most elegant plan. On the other hand, it's pretty easy to get away with if it succeeds. It was an accident. But luckily for all of us, the boulder shattered on the way down. It hit and a piece of it hit the Buddha's foot, but it did cause him some serious injury. So what's the moral of this story? Enlightened, unenlightened, awake, asleep, karma still is present in our lives. And it doesn't mean that if you have this wonderful, blissed out, ecstatic enlightenment experience that everything's going to go smoothly for the rest of your life. You're still going to grow old, get sick, and die, and you can still get infections. Okay? So that's what happened to the Buddha. That's another reason, by the way, that I personally give a lot of credibility to some of these stories, is because if I were creating a religion from whole cloth, my protagonist would not have these things happen, right? None of this would work on him. He would be above all this. He would be perfect and would never get sick. So the fact that things like this happen make the skeptic in me think, maybe there's some truth to this story. Sounds like something that could have happened. So for his next attempt on the Buddha's life, Devadatta gets a war elephant. Now, I love this because the war elephant is just not dangerous enough, so he gets it drunk. I don't even know how you get an elephant drunk. That would take a lot of alcohol, wouldn't it? Because they're big and have a slow metabolism, I think. Anyway, so he gets it drunk. He lines it up on the Buddha, which I'm also wondering, how do you line up a war elephant? And then he sicks it on him in some kind of way. Perhaps he says he released it, is what the sutra says. Maybe there's some other writings there that I'm not aware of where he whips it, I don't know, gets it. Anyway, somehow he gets it to go. So everybody sees this elephant coming on the rampage and they run away, but the Buddha just stands there. His other cousin, Ananda, the good cousin, throws himself between the Buddha and the elephant, trying to save the Buddha's life. And the Buddha's like, Ananda, I got this. Get out of the way. It's okay. So he moves Ananda aside, and the Buddha just stands there, and the elephant just stops in front of him. And then the elephant uses his trunk, and he takes the dust from the Buddha's feet and puts it on his own head. So it's an interesting story. And now, remember that the Buddha's mother, before he was conceived, or the night he was conceived perhaps, had a dream about an elephant with 6 tusks entering her side. And then the Buddha one time, when he was wanting some peace and quiet from his followers, they were getting into an argument over how things should go, he wandered off into the forest and had a conversation with an old elephant who referred to himself as Tusker, right? So elephants play this prominent role in the Buddha's life, and what all that means, I honestly don't know. What it means for us in 21st century West, the Buddha liked elephants, I don't know. But there are common animals there. So if the Buddha were to be alive now, he would probably encounter a house cat or a stray dog, or something that's common here in our community. So that's the story with the elephant, and it was very calm. There are a lot of Buddhist stories, by the way, about animals or demons that come charging at the Buddha. Remember when Mara sent his armies? He was the king of the demons, and he sent the armies at the Buddha, and the Buddha just remained very calm, and so the demons gave up because they couldn't scare him. So there's a lot of stories like that with the Buddha and other Buddhist figures and bodhisattvas, where they simply remain calm, and it seems to dissipate the energy. Now, I don't know about a drunk war elephant, but I do know that if you're having a confrontation with a dog that you don't know and they're frightened of you, that if you remain very calm, the dog loses their fear. If you become afraid, they become more afraid because now you're unpredictable. But if you remain calm and you move slowly, then the dog's like, okay, maybe I'm not in danger, and the situation de-escalates. Maybe something like that was going on here. I don't know. So Devadatta, he's not given up. Now he says, I am stricter than the Buddha. You all should come and study with me because I don't deal with this staying in houses BS. If you come with me, we're going to sleep only in the forest. We're only going to eat alms food, and we're not going to go to rich people's houses. And we're only going to wear rags, and we're not going to have any fish or meat. Strict vegan diet. Okay, maybe vegetarian. They might have eaten eggs. I don't know. But this appealed to a lot of people. A lot of people thought, yeah, it's too easy. The middle way is too easy. It should be harder. So we're going to go with Devadatta. And supposedly 500 monks left with him. You notice it's always 500. So maybe it was 439. I don't know. But the numbers always seem to be 500. Okay. So the Buddha was saddened by this. He let them go. But he did send Shariputra and Magdalyana to talk to the people who had left. Remember, these two had been Brahmin, and these are the ones that the Buddha had seen approaching from a ways away and said, they're going to be very important followers of mine. And Shariputra is featured in the Heart Sutra that we chant. So they go and they talk to the other monks, and they convince them to come back and return with the Buddha and rejoin the Sangha. And Devadatta once again is humiliated, but this time he finally realizes that he had made a mistake. And so he decided to go back to the Buddha to apologize. But on his way there, he got sick and died. And he had told some people that he was going to do this. And again, if I were writing this, if this were a Hollywood script, we'd have the joyful reunion, right? But no, it's, ugh. So did this actually happen? I'm going to go with probably so. It sounds plausible at the very least. It sounds plausible because it's not picture perfect. There was no joyful reunion. He passed away before he had an opportunity to make peace with his cousin. So the Buddha's health began to deteriorate when he reached his 70s. He had aches and pains, like we would expect as we get older, right? And his cousin Ananda massaged his back in the late afternoon sun. By his 80s, the Buddha was in a considerable amount of physical pain, but he practiced equanimity and he continued meditating every day. Ananda expected the Buddha to give a final teaching because this was the custom, and some spiritual teachers today still do this. They're on their deathbed and they have one big, profound thing that they say. But the Buddha said to Ananda, I've been teaching for 45 years. I'm not the sort of teacher who keeps the teachings in a closed fist. So he had already said everything that he needed to say. The Sangha headed north, resting for weeks at a time with the Buddha in his 80s. And they stopped in a mangrove grove at Pava, which was owned by the blacksmith Chunda. And Chunda invited them to dinner. The Buddha looked at the food and he told Chunda, don't give any of that pork to the Sangha. Maybe he had an idea that it was turning. But the Buddha ate it when it was offered to him. Remember that the belief was, and still is in many parts of the world, that the lay people get merit by feeding the monastics. And in order for that merit to transfer, the monastics actually have to eat it. When I go to ethnic temples, like the local Vietnamese temples, and they feed me, I try some of everything that's offered, because frequently the people who brought it and prepared it are standing in the doorway watching to see if we try it. So we try everything, right? So that's what the Buddha did. And it made him sick. It made him extremely sick, and he started bleeding from his bowels. So he knew that he was dying. He now has food poisoning. And he instructed Ananda to tell Chunda the blacksmith that giving a Buddha his last meal was an act of great merit. And I love this story. The Buddha did not want this man who had accidentally poisoned him to feel guilty. He didn't want him to experience remorse. So he said, you tell him this is an act of great merit to have fed me my last meal. So Ananda, before I get to that, the Buddha told Ananda that their teacher, because the Buddha says, who's going to be our teacher? And the Buddha said, it's going to be the Dharma, discipline, and practice. And then Ananda went into a shed so the Buddha wouldn't see him cry, because he'd been with him since pretty much the beginning. And Ananda also had not ever awakened yet. And then now his teacher was dying. So the Buddha called him back and said, don't worry, Ananda, you will get enlightenment soon. Which is also a very generous thing of him to do. And that is what came to pass. Ananda did awaken soon after the Buddha's death. So the Buddha sent for the people of the village, and he performed one last ordination for those who wanted to be ordained then. And he asked for questions. Since there weren't any, he took that as a sign that his work was complete. His last words were these: truly, monks, I declare to you, it is the nature of whatever is formed to dissolve. Attain perfection through diligence. He went into meditation, and from there he passed into the deathless state of nirvana. There was a local earthquake, just as there had been when he was born, and when he became enlightened, the earth shook in recognition of his passing. And this was approximately 483 BCE when the Buddha passed away. So that is the life of the Buddha, and I hope that you found some things in there that resonate with you, perhaps you find interesting and you want to learn more about, or some stories that intrigue you in some way that make you see that he was just a human being. He was just this guy. If you like Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's a line there, it's just this guy, you know? Okay, it's just this guy, and that's how I think about the Buddha. But he attained something. He woke up to the truth of this moment, and he spent 45 years teaching. So when we go into a temple and we bow to the Buddha statue, I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm thinking in my mind, thanks. Thanks, Siddhartha. We appreciate that.